In the beginning, before temples rose and before the Nile learned to obey the seasons, Egypt was a land holding its breath. The sky stretched wide and silent above endless water and sand, waiting for something or someone to give it meaning. From the deep order of the cosmos, the first gods shaped the world not with noise, but with intention. And among their greatest creations was a god destined not only to rule the living, but to define what it meant to live well. His name was Osiris. Before we dive in, give that like button a little tap, and if you want to stick around for more late-night journeys like this, hit subscribe. While you're getting comfy, tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your world. I love seeing the mix of places that come along for the ride. Now dim the lights, maybe grab a blanket, and let's drift into today's story together. Osiris was born from divine balance. He was the child of Geb, the earth beneath all feet, and Nut, the endless sky arched above creation. From the moment he emerged, the gods saw something different in him. Where others embodied raw forces, storms, deserts, darkness, Osiris carried steadiness. He was calm where the world was loud, patient where chaos rushed forward. The gods did not need to teach him how to rule. Order seemed to flow naturally from his presence. When the time came to choose a king for Egypt, Osiris did not seize power. It settled on him like a crown that had always belonged there. At his side stood Isis, his sister and his equal. She was not merely a companion, but a force of wisdom and magic that matched Osiris's sense of justice. Together they ruled not as distant gods demanding obedience, but as guides walking among the people. Osiris governed the visible world, law, land, harvest, while Isis protected what could not be seen, knowledge, healing, and the hidden threads that hold life together. Their union was more than marriage. It was the harmony between mind and heart, between structure and compassion. Before their reign, Egypt suffered. The land was fertile, but the people did not know how to tend it. Floods came without warning, destroying what little was built. Hunger moved from village to village like a shadow that never slept. Without laws, disputes ended in blood. Without shared customs, families turned inward, tribes clashed, and fear ruled where trust should have grown. The gods watched as humanity struggled, surviving rather than living. Egypt existed, but it did not yet thrive. Osiris changed that by teaching, not commanding. He showed the people how to read the river, to understand when the Nile would rise and when it would retreat. He taught them to plant seeds not in desperation, but in rhythm with the land. Under his guidance, fields replaced wastelands, and granaries filled instead of standing empty. Bread became common, hunger became memory. For the first time, survival was no longer the only goal. But Osiris's gifts went beyond agriculture. He gave Egypt law, not rules forged through fear, but principles rooted in fairness. He taught that strength did not justify cruelty, that power came with responsibility, and that every action carried weight. Disputes were settled with words instead of weapons. Communities learned cooperation. Osiris did not demand worship for these gifts. He asked only that people live in balance, with the land, with one another, and with themselves. As order spread, so did joy. Music filled the evenings. Festivals followed the harvests. Art appeared on walls where once there had been nothing but stone. Egypt entered a golden age, not because it was rich, but because it was stable. People trusted tomorrow. And when a land trusts its future, it builds instead of destroys. From the throne, Osiris watched his kingdom flourish, but not all eyes looked on with pride. In the shadows stood Set, his brother. Where Osiris ruled fertile land and life-giving water, Set embodied the desert, storms, and untamed chaos. He was not evil by nature, but restless. The order Osiris created felt to Set like a cage. Each successful harvest, each song sung in Osiris's name, carved deeper into Set's resentment. Set saw himself as overlooked, pushed aside in favor of a god who embodied calm rather than force. He believed strength should dominate, not guide. In Osiris's peaceful rule, Set did not see wisdom, he saw weakness. And as Egypt prospered, the distance between the brothers grew. What began as jealousy hardened into something colder, something patient. While Osiris focused on nurturing his kingdom, Set watched and learned. He studied his brother's trust in others, his openness, his belief that harmony could endure without constant vigilance. Set understood something dangerous. Egypt loved Osiris, and love, unlike fear, creates vulnerability. The seeds of envy took root quietly. No storms announced them, no omens warned the gods. Beneath the surface of Egypt's golden age, betrayal was beginning to breathe. Because every era of light casts a shadow, and even the greatest king cannot see every threat, especially when it wears the face of family. Prosperity can silence many dangers, but it can also sharpen resentment. As Egypt thrived under Osiris, a quiet storm gathered where few cared to look. Beneath the songs of harvest and the steady rhythm of law, ambition stirred in the heart of a god who believed the world had chosen the wrong king. This is where the balance of Egypt began to fracture. Not through war, not through disaster, but through betrayal carefully disguised as celebration. Set watched his brother from a distance, measuring every cheer, every prayer spoken in Osiris's name. To Set, order felt like stagnation. Where Osiris saw harmony, Set saw control. Where others saw peace, Set felt erased. He ruled deserts and storms, lands feared rather than loved, and resentment grew with every passing season. Egypt no longer needed chaos to survive, and that, to Set, was unforgivable. Set's ambition did not arrive suddenly. It matured slowly, fed by silence and comparison. He convinced himself that Egypt belonged to strength, not gentleness, that rule should be taken, not given. In his mind, Osiris had grown careless, trusting a world that had once been wild. Set believed the throne was not stolen from him, it was denied, and denial became justification. Instead of raising an army, Set chose patience. He knew force would fail where affection reigned. Osiris was loved. To destroy him publicly would turn the gods and the people against the attacker. Set needed subtlety. He needed a moment so clean, so unexpected, that no one would recognize it as violence until it was too late. And so he began to build a gift. In secret, Set summoned craftsmen loyal not to justice but to reward. He gave them precise measurements, taken not from rumor but from Osiris himself. Every length of limb, every width of shoulder. The object they constructed was beautiful, polished wood, reinforced with precious metals, carved with symbols of royalty and eternity. It looked like a treasure fit for a king. It was shaped like a promise. This coffin was no accident. It was designed for one body and one body alone. When it was complete, Set announced a grand feast, a celebration to honor Egypt's success. Music echoed through palace halls, wine flowed freely. Gods and nobles gathered, unaware that the night had been rehearsed in Set's mind countless times. Osiris arrived without suspicion. Why would he fear his own brother in a kingdom built on trust? As laughter filled the room, Set unveiled his creation. He praised its craftsmanship, its beauty, its perfection. Then he made a game of it. He declared that whoever fit the chest perfectly could claim it as a gift. Guests took turns, joking as they climbed inside. The chest was too long for some, too narrow for others.
Each failure drew laughter. The mood remained light, safe. Then Osiris stepped forward. He lay down inside the coffin, amused, relaxed, unaware that the measurements matched him because they had been stolen from him. The moment his body settled into place, the room changed. Before Osiris could rise, Set and his followers slammed the lid shut. Nails struck wood, molten metal sealed the seams. Laughter collapsed into shock. Celebration shattered into chaos. Osiris called out, but the coffin did not answer. The chest was sealed tight, airtight, and unforgiving. The king of Egypt, god of life and order, was trapped by the very trust that had defined his rule. Set did not hesitate. He had prepared for hesitation and removed it from himself long ago. With practiced force, the conspirators carried the coffin from the hall as confusion spread behind them. Outside, under a sky that offered no warning, they dragged the chest to the Nile. The river had always been Osiris's ally. It nourished his people. It obeyed his understanding of seasons and cycles. Set used that loyalty against him. Without ceremony, without pause, the coffin was cast into the water. It struck the surface once, then disappeared beneath the current, carried away by the same force that had once symbolized life. The Nile did not resist. It flowed on. By the time truth replaced confusion, it was too late. The coffin was gone. Osiris was gone. Egypt stood frozen between disbelief and dread. No enemy had crossed its borders. No disaster had announced itself. The king had vanished during a feast meant to honor him. Set returned to the palace wearing composure like armor. He spoke calmly. He claimed confusion. He suggested fate. And in the absence of Osiris, doubt crept into every corner of the land. The laws that had held Egypt steady felt suddenly fragile. Fields grew quiet. Songs stopped mid-verse. Mourning swept through villages and cities alike. People gathered at the riverbanks, staring into the water as if willing it to return what it had taken. Temples filled with unanswered prayers. The balance Osiris had built did not collapse instantly. It eroded, slowly, painfully, like land eaten away by floodwaters. Without Osiris, disputes returned, fear resurfaced, trust weakened. Egypt remembered what it had been before order, and the memory was sharp. Set watched it all unfold. He had not just removed a king, he had tested the strength of harmony itself. And while Egypt grieved, Set prepared to claim what he believed was always meant to be his. But the story did not end in the river. The Nile carries many things to distant shores, and not all journeys are meant to be final. Because death, in the world of the gods, is not always an ending.
Some losses break the world. Others refuse to stay buried. When Osiris vanished into the Nile, Egypt did not simply lose a king, it lost its center. But grief does not move everyone in the same way. Where others mourned, Isis listened. And in the silence left behind by betrayal, she heard a truth that would not rest. Isis did not learn of Osiris's fate through ceremony or proclamation. She felt it. The air around her shifted. The balance she guarded trembled. Magic that once flowed cleanly now resisted her touch. When whispers reached her of a sealed chest, of a feast turned strange, of a river carrying something it should not, Isis did not collapse. She focused. Love, sharpened by loss, became resolve. She understood what Set had done before the story fully reached her ears. Betrayal leaves a signature,
and Isis knew her brother-in-law's ambition well enough to recognize it even in absence. Osiris had been taken, sealed away by trust, and cast into the current like an object instead of a god. For a moment, grief rose like a wave, then Isis stood, and Egypt felt it. She did not call for armies, she did not confront Set, she chose the harder path. Isis disguised herself and left the palace behind. No crown marked her, no procession followed. She traveled as a widow, as a seeker, as a woman willing to cross every boundary the world had placed before her. Through marshland and desert, along the winding banks of the Nile, she searched. She asked fishermen what the river had carried. She listened to children speak of strange shapes in the water. She followed rumor, instinct, and magic in equal measure. The journey took her beyond Egypt's borders. The Nile does not end where kingdoms end, and neither did Isis' determination. Far from home, in a foreign land where unfamiliar gods were worshipped beneath unfamiliar skies, she felt a pull she could not ignore. There, lodged within the roots of a great tree, was the coffin. The tree had grown around it, fed by divine presence. Its trunk thickened, its branches twisted upward, strong and unnatural in their beauty. Even strangers sensed something sacred in it. The local king had taken the tree and shaped it into a pillar for his palace, unaware of what lay hidden within. Isis entered that palace quietly. She did not demand, she revealed. With words woven in magic and sorrow, she told her story. The foreign rulers felt the weight of it and stepped aside. The pillar was opened, the coffin emerged, and when Isis laid her hands upon it, the world seemed to pause. She had found him. Isis brought Osiris's body back to Egypt under cover of night. She hid it in the reeds, shielding it with spells meant to confuse eyes and quiet the earth itself. For the first time since the betrayal, hope breathed again. Osiris had been taken, but not erased, not yet. Isis planned carefully. She knew resurrection was no simple act. Life, once broken, demands preparation. She gathered knowledge, summoned protection, and allowed herself one moment to grieve beside him. The god who had ruled beside her now lay still, marked by betrayal, but untouched by decay. Even in silence, Osiris carried presence. But Set had not finished. The desert god felt the shift the same way Isis had. Power moved, magic stirred, and suspicion sharpened his thoughts. While hunting one night, Set discovered the hidden body. Rage returned, hotter than before. Betrayal had removed Osiris once. This time, Set would make certain nothing remained to restore. He destroyed the body and scattered the pieces across Egypt, not out of haste, but intention. Each fragment was sent to a different region, buried, hidden, or cast away. Set believed division meant erasure, that no god, no magic, no love could reassemble what had been deliberately broken. Satisfied, he left, certain the threat had ended. He underestimated Isis. When Isis discovered what Set had done, grief returned, but it did not weaken her, it sharpened her purpose. She began a second journey, more painful than the first. This time, she searched not for one body, but for many fragments of the same truth. She traveled the length of Egypt, guided by visions, by whispers of the land, by a bond that refused to dissolve. Where a fragment was found, Isis performed rites. She purified the ground, she honored the place. Each location became sacred, woven into Egypt's spiritual map. The land itself participated in Osiris's story, becoming both witness and guardian. Piece by piece, Isis gathered what Set had scattered. The task took time. It demanded endurance beyond grief. But Isis was not only a goddess of magic, she was devotion made active, and devotion does not abandon its purpose. By the end of her search, Egypt had changed. The people felt it. Something had passed through their land: sorrow, determination, and a quiet defiance of finality. Osiris was still gone, but he was no longer lost. The story was no longer about a fallen king. It was becoming something else. Because when a god is broken and gathered by love, the result is never simply a return to what was. It is transformation. And in the shadows of that transformation, the boundary between life and death began to shift. What Set tried to erase would soon define eternity.
Death is often treated as an ending, but in the oldest stories of Egypt, death was a doorway, and someone had to be the first to walk through it and return changed. This is where Osiris crossed that threshold, not as a king of the living, but as something far more enduring. After Set scattered Osiris across the land, Isis did not hesitate. She began again, moving with purpose shaped by grief and certainty. Guided by visions and the quiet pull of magic, she traveled from delta to desert, reclaiming what had been torn apart. Each fragment was treated not as a relic, but as a living truth. She purified every place where a piece was found, marking the land itself as sacred. Egypt became a map of loss, devotion, and persistence. When the final fragment was recovered, Isis brought them together in a hidden place, far from Set's reach. There, joined by her sister Nephthys and aided by the wisdom of Thoth, Isis prepared for an act the world had never seen. Osiris could not simply be restored to life as he once was. The boundary he had crossed demanded transformation. This moment gave rise to one of Egypt's most enduring traditions. Isis performed the first act of mummification. She wrapped Osiris's body carefully, deliberately, honoring each part with ritual and intention. This was not preservation for memory's sake, it was preparation for continuity. Every wrapping symbolized protection. Every binding acknowledged that the body, even in stillness, mattered. Through this act, Isis defined a new relationship between the living and the dead, one rooted in respect rather than fear. As the rites continued, magic filled the air, thick and focused. Isis spoke words older than temples, words shaped by creation itself. Thoth recorded them, ensuring they would never be lost. These were not spells of reversal, they were rites of passage. Osiris was not being returned to the throne of Egypt, he was being prepared for something else. And for a moment, brief, powerful, and deliberate, Osiris rose. Life returned to him not as permanence, but as purpose. Enough to speak, enough to conceive, enough to ensure that Set's betrayal would not be the final chapter. In that sacred interval between worlds, Isis and Osiris united once more. From this union came Horus, a child born not of peace, but of promise. Osiris did not remain among the living. Instead, he transformed. Death reshaped him, refining rather than erasing. Osiris became something Egypt had never known, a god who ruled beyond life. He descended into the Duat, the realm beneath the world where souls traveled after their final breath. There, Osiris took his throne, not through conquest, but through understanding. He knew death because he had experienced it. He knew loss because it had claimed him. And so he ruled with fairness unmatched by any force of fear. As Lord of the Underworld, Osiris became the judge of souls, not a tyrant, not an executioner, but a measure. In his presence, the truth of a life could not hide.
Hearts were weighed against balance itself, and Osiris ensured that justice followed meaning, not power. In death, as in life, order endured. Above the world, Isis hid and protected Horus. Set still ruled Egypt, believing himself victorious, unaware that the future was growing in secrecy. Horus was raised with knowledge of what had been taken from him. He learned not just strength, but restraint, not just combat, but responsibility. He was taught that vengeance without balance becomes another form of chaos. Osiris watched from the duat. Though he no longer walked the earth, his influence reached upward. Through dreams, through omens, through the steady promise of justice, Osiris remained present. He was no longer the god who taught humanity how to live, but the god who showed them what awaited after life and why living well mattered. His transformation reshaped Egyptian belief forever. Death was no longer a void, it was a continuation, a journey governed by law, memory, and truth. Osiris became the anchor of that belief, the assurance that nothing meaningful was truly lost. Set had believed destruction was final. He was wrong. Because Osiris did not return to reclaim his old throne, he claimed a greater one, and in doing so, he ensured that chaos could never fully erase order, not in life, not in death. As Horus grew, the promise of confrontation approached. The story was no longer about betrayal or grief, it was about restoration. Father and son, living and dead, bound by a purpose larger than either alone. The balance of Egypt had shifted, but it had not broken. It was waiting.
Every civilization asks the same question in the end. When the final breath fades, what remains? For ancient Egypt, the answer stood waiting beyond life itself, seated on a throne of silence and truth. This is where Osiris reigned, not as a fallen king, but as the eternal judge whose presence shaped how generations understood death, justice, and meaning. In the depths of the duat, the underworld unfolded not as a place of fear, but of order. There, Osiris sat enthroned, wrapped in the symbols of rebirth and authority. His crown marked him as sovereign of what lay beyond the living world. He did not rule with force, he ruled with inevitability. Every soul, no matter how powerful in life, would one day stand before him. The underworld was not chaos, it was structured, deliberate, and sacred. Rivers mirrored the Nile, fields echoed those of Egypt, not as reward, but as continuation. Osiris's realm reflected the belief that life and death were not opposites, but chapters in the same story. And at the heart of that realm stood the Hall of Judgment. The hall was vast and still. Its columns rose like frozen time, carved with truths no voice could deny. This was where the soul's journey reached its turning point. No guards shouted commands, no threats were spoken. Judgment did not require intimidation. Truth arrived on its own. Each soul entered carrying a heart, not a symbol, but the record of a life. In Egyptian belief, the heart remembered everything, every choice, every intention, every act of kindness or cruelty. Before Osiris, that heart was placed on a scale opposite the feather of Ma'at, the embodiment of balance and truth. The weighing of the heart was not a trial in the way humans imagine trials. No arguments were made, no excuses accepted. The heart simply revealed itself. If it balanced with the feather, the soul was granted passage into the field of reeds, a place of peace, continuity, and earned rest. If it did not, the soul faced dissolution, not punishment, but unmaking. Existence without harmony could not endure. Osiris presided over this ceremony in silence. He did not need to speak. His presence was judgment enough. As a god who had been betrayed,
destroyed and transformed, he understood the weight of actions better than any other. He judged not with anger, but with clarity. His rulings were final because they were fair. Through Osiris, death became meaningful. It was no longer random or terrifying. It became a mirror held up to life itself. To live justly was to prepare for eternity. To live in chaos was to face imbalance beyond the grave. While Osiris ruled the unseen world, events in the living one reached their turning point. Horus, grown and resolute, challenged Set for the throne of Egypt. Their conflict was not simply a battle between gods, it was a clash of principles. Horus represented rightful order, continuity, and responsibility. Set embodied force, disruption, and unchecked ambition. Their struggle echoed across land and sky, watched by gods and mortals alike. The conflict was long and costly. Victory did not come easily, but in the end, Horus prevailed, not through domination alone, but through legitimacy. The gods recognized what Egypt needed. Set was cast out, his reign broken, his chaos contained. Order returned, not as something fragile, but as something earned. Horus took the throne of the living. Osiris remained king of the dead. Together they formed a balance unlike any other. Father and son ruled separate realms, united by purpose. One governed life, the other governed what followed. Egypt was whole again, anchored by a belief that existence extended beyond the horizon of breath. Osiris's influence reached far beyond myth. His story reshaped how Egyptians buried their dead, honored their ancestors, and understood morality. Tombs were built not as monuments to fear, but as homes for continuation. Spells were written not to escape death, but to navigate it. To be remembered was not enough. One had to be worthy. For thousands of years, Osiris remained present in daily life. Farmers prayed to him when planting seeds, trusting in cycles of death and rebirth. Families invoked his name at funerals, believing their loved ones walked a path he had cleared. Kings aligned themselves with Osiris to legitimize their rule, knowing that power without justice could not endure. Even as empires rose and fell, Osiris endured. He was the proof that betrayal does not end meaning, that death does not erase value, that justice, once defined, can outlast the world that created it. Osiris did not conquer eternity, he organized it. And in doing so, he answered the oldest question humanity has ever asked, not with comfort, but with purpose. Live in balance, act with truth, because nothing truly disappears. It only moves to another realm where it will be seen clearly at last. This story does not end here. Every myth we explore connects to another, forming a web as vast as history itself. If you want to keep traveling through these ancient worlds, through gods, legends, and the ideas that shaped civilizations, this is the place to stay. Join this channel and keep walking these timeless paths with me, story by story.